Lee Sunwoo stood at her classroom window, watching her kindergarten students play in the afternoon sun. It was just another normal day. Or at least, that's what she thought until she saw the massive spaceship appear in the sky. The ship was bigger than any building she had ever seen. It hung over Seoul like a metal cloud, casting a shadow that stretched for miles. Sunwoo's first thought wasn't about herself. It was about her students. She quickly got them inside and made sure they stayed calm by starting their favorite song. While the children sang, the world changed forever. On every screen, on every device, the same message played. Greetings, Earth. We are the Galactic Council. Your world has reached the level of development required for first contact. 3 days later, Sunwoo sat in a government building, feeling very out of place. She looked down at the letter in her hands again. The government wanted her to be Earth's ambassador to the aliens. It made no sense to her. Ms. Lee, said the official sitting across from her, we've watched how you handle your classroom, how you solve fights between children from different backgrounds, how you teach them to understand each other. That's exactly what we need. Sunwoo shook her head. But I'm just a teacher. I don't know anything about space or aliens. The official smiled. The Galactic Council sent us information about themselves. They solve all their problems with shows of force. Every species sends heavily armed ambassadors to their meetings. We think, maybe that's not the best way. Sunwoo thought about her classroom, about how she never needed weapons to keep peace among 30 energetic children. What exactly do you want me to do? She asked. Be yourself, the official said. Go to their council as you are, unarmed, ready to listen, ready to teach. Show them there's another way. 2 weeks later, Sunwoo stood before the Earth's United Nations. She wore a simple blue dress, the same one she often wore to parent-teacher meetings. No weapons, no armor, just a datapad with Earth's information and a universal translator the aliens have provided. The Council expects us to send a military commander, a UN representative said. They might see sending an unarmed teacher as an insult. Sunwoo stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was calm and clear, just like when she spoke to her class. In my 15 years of teaching, I've learned that the first step to peace is showing up ready to make friends, not fight. Children understand this naturally. Maybe it's time we reminded the adults. The room fell silent. Then, slowly, people began to nod. Some even smiled. They had been so worried about looking strong that they had forgotten about being wise. The day Sunwoo left Earth, she carried with her a bag containing just 3 things: her datapad, the translator, and a small photo of her kindergarten class. The huge alien ship that came to pick her up was covered in weapons. The alien crew wore heavy armor and carried big guns. They seemed confused when they saw her simple bag and peaceful smile. Where is your security team? The alien captain asked through the translator. Your weapons, your armor. Sunwoo smiled the same way she did when welcoming a new student to her class. I don't need those things, she said. I come ready to listen and learn. Sometimes, that's the strongest position of all. As the ship lifted off, carrying Earth's first ambassador to the stars, no one knew that this simple decision, sending an unarmed teacher instead of an armed warrior, would change the galaxy forever. The biggest changes often start with the smallest steps, and humanity had just taken its first step into a very different future. This was how Earth's adventure in galactic diplomacy began. Not with a show of force, but with a teacher's gentle smile and an empty weapons rack. The galaxy would never be the same again. Commander Kim Do-hyun had worked with aliens for 5 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The council chamber was filled with armed representatives from 100 different worlds. Each ambassador carried at least 3 weapons, some wore powered armor that could destroy a small building. And then there was Lee Sunwoo, walking into the chamber in her simple blue dress, carrying nothing but a datapad. Do-hyun watched from his observation post. As the Council's human-alien relations specialist, it was his job to understand both sides. But right now, he didn't understand anything. "This must be a trick," General Cax said beside him. The alien general's scales shifted color with suspicion. "No species has ever sent an unarmed ambassador. Never. Maybe that's why Earth did it," Du Hyun said quietly. He remembered his own first days working with the Council, how everything had seemed like a contest of strength. Sun Wu reached the center of the chamber. The other ambassadors moved away from her, as if her lack of weapons was somehow dangerous. The Council leader, an 8-foot-tall alien covered in battle armor, looked down at her. "Ambassador Lee," the leader said through the translator, "you come before us improperly prepared. Where is your security detail? Your defensive systems?" Sun Wu smiled. It was the same smile Du Hyun remembered from his own school days. "I bring something different," she said. "On Earth, I teach young children. They come to me speaking different languages, having different beliefs. Yet they learn to be friends without any weapons at all." The chamber filled with confused murmurs. Du Hyun saw General Cax's scales turn deep red, a sign of anger or fear. "This is an insult," one ambassador shouted. "She compares us to children." "No," Sun Wu said calmly. "I compare you to my best students, the ones who learn that true strength comes from understanding others, not from threatening them." Do Hyun held his breath. In all his years working with the Council, no one had ever spoken to them like this. He expected anger, maybe even violence. Instead, something surprising happened. A young council member, one who had just joined, stepped forward. "I want to hear more," she said, "about these Earth teaching methods." General Cax tried to stop her, but others joined in. They had questions. Many had never thought about diplomacy without weapons. Sun Wu answered each question with patience and clarity, just as she would for her students. Do Hyun watched as the mood in the chamber slowly changed. Not everyone was convinced, but they were listening. He wrote in his report, "Earth's ambassador shows that sometimes the most powerful move is to put down your weapons." At the end of the day, Sun Wu was assigned quarters in the council station. Du Hyun was ordered to watch her closely. "She must have some secret plan," General Cax insisted. "No one is this peaceful naturally." But as Du Hyun observed Sun Wu over the next few days, he saw no secrets, no hidden plans. She treated every alien she met with the same gentle respect, whether they were council leaders or cleaning staff. She learned their names, asked about their worlds, and listened to their stories. Maybe, Du Hyun thought as he wrote his evening report, this is exactly what the galaxy needs. Someone who sees past the weapons to the people beneath. He looked at his own ceremonial weapon, hanging unused on his wall, and wondered if perhaps it was time for a change. The council might not know it yet, but their world of weapons and warnings was already beginning to shift. All because one unarmed teacher dared to suggest there might be a better way. The council dining hall had never seen anything like this before. Instead of the usual separate tables divided by species and rank, Ambassador Lee Sun Wu had arranged one long table where everyone sat together. The traditional armed guards stood at the walls, watching in confusion as representatives from different worlds shared a meal. Park Ja-hyun, the youngest council member, sat next to Sun Wu. She had never attended an informal diplomatic meeting before. In fact, the council handbook specifically warned against them. But here she was, watching the Earth ambassador change everything. On Earth, Sun Wu explained as she served food to those around her, many important agreements start with a shared meal. When we eat together, we learn to see each other as people, not just representatives. General Cax stood at the entrance, his scales turning various shades of purple with confusion. "This is not proper protocol," he announced. "Diplomatic discussions must take place in the formal chamber." Sun Wu looked up from helping an ambassador from a water-breathing world with their eating utensils. "General Cax, please join us. I have saved a seat for you." The dining hall fell silent. Everyone knew General Cax never broke protocol. He was famous for following every rule exactly. But Sun Wu's invitation wasn't technically against any rule. No one had ever thought to make a rule against shared meals. To everyone's surprise, Jia Yun stood up. "General, I believe we should observe this Earth custom. For research purposes, of course." She smiled, remembering how Sun Wu had taught her this diplomatic technique. When in doubt, call something research. The general's scales shifted between purple and green. Finally, curiosity won over tradition. He sat down at the table, though he kept his weapons close. As the meal continued, something remarkable happened. Representatives who had argued for years over territory began talking about their home world's foods. Species that had never cooperated found themselves sharing recipes. Even General Cax relaxed enough to explain the traditional meaning of his scale colors to an interested group. Commander Kim Do-hyun watched from his observation post, taking careful notes. "The Earth Ambassador has achieved more progress in one meal than the Council has in 6 formal sessions," he wrote in his report. Jia Yun noticed something else. The younger representatives were paying close attention to Sun Wu's methods. They saw how she turned simple questions about food into deeper discussions about culture and cooperation. "How do you know this will work?" Jia Yun asked Sun Wu quietly. "In my classroom." Sun Wu replied, "I never put arguing children in separate corners. I bring them together and give them a shared activity. Soon, they forget why they were fighting and start working together." As if to prove her point, 2 representatives who had been arguing about mining rights were now excitedly planning the joint cultural festival. By the end of the meal, 3 long-standing disputes had been resolved informally. No weapons were drawn. No threats were made. Just conversation and understanding, shared over food. The next day, Jia Yun submitted a formal request to modify council protocol. She wanted to include what she called informal cooperative sessions in all future negotiations. General Cax surprised everyone by adding his support to the request. "Perhaps," he wrote in his endorsement, "there are forms of strength we have not yet explored." As Sun Wu prepared for the next day's sessions, she added a note to her own report to Earth. "The galaxy is ready for change. They just needed someone to show them where to start." The Council's rigid diplomatic traditions had stood for thousands of years, but they were no match for a teacher who understood that the path to peace often began with something as simple as sharing a meal. The emergency alarms rang through the Council station. 2 powerful species, the mountain dwellers and the ocean builders, were preparing for war over a chain of resource-rich planets. Their massive warships faced each other across space, weapons ready. Lee Sun Wu sat quietly in the emergency council meeting, watching as representatives shouted and threatened each other. The mountain dwellers' ambassador pounded his armored fist on the table. The ocean builders' leader released angry clouds of blue vapor. Commander Kim Do-hyun stood at his post, worried. He had seen space battles before. They always ended with destroyed ships and lost lives. The Council's usual solution, sending more warships to frighten both sides, wasn't working this time. "We must show more force," General Cax declared. "Send the Council's entire battle fleet." Sun Wu stood up. The room fell silent. Everyone had learned to pay attention when the unarmed ambassador spoke. "What if," she said calmly, "instead of sending ships to frighten them, we send ships to connect them?" The council members looked confused. Park Jae-yun, who had come to trust Sun Wu's unusual ideas, asked, "What do you mean?" "The mountain dwellers are excellent engineers," Sun Wu explained. "The ocean builders have amazing biological technology. Instead of fighting over resources, they could work together to develop new technologies that benefit both peoples." General Cax's scales turned bright orange with surprise. "You want them to cooperate. They hate each other." "They hate each other because they don't know each other," Sun Wu replied. She turned on her datapad and showed images of Earth's history. "My own country once had bitter enemies, but then we started student exchange programs. Scientists began working together. Artists shared their cultures. Now those old enemies are close friends. Do-hyun stepped forward, breaking protocol. She's right. I'd studied both species. The mountain dwellers' mining technology could help the ocean builders explore deep underwater resources. The ocean builders' biological computers could revolutionize mountain dweller cities. The council chamber erupted in argument. Many representatives thought the idea was foolish, but Jae-yun and several younger members supported it strongly. "Let us try," Jae-yun said. "What do we lose by attempting peace before we turn to war?" The council leader looked at the battle maps, then at Sun Woo's peaceful face. Finally, he made a decision. "We will try this Earth method. But if it fails, we send in the battle fleet." Sun Woo spent the next 3 days preparing. She asked both species to send scientists and artists along with their diplomats. She arranged shared workspaces where they could show each other their discoveries. Most importantly, she made sure they ate meals together, just as she had done in the council. At first, both sides were stiff and unfriendly. But then a mountain dweller engineer became excited about an ocean builder's living computer. An ocean builder artist was fascinated by mountain dweller crystal sculptures. Slowly, they began to talk, to share, to create together. Do-hyun watched in amazement as the crisis transformed into an opportunity. He wrote in his report, "The Earth Ambassador has turned enemies into colleagues using nothing more powerful than curiosity and cooperation." 2 weeks later, the mountain dwellers and ocean builders signed their first joint research agreement. The disputed planets would become shared science centers where both species could work together. As Sun Woo watched them sign the agreement, she smiled. She had taught her most important lesson yet, that the greatest power in the galaxy wasn't in weapons or threats, but in the simple act of bringing people together to create something new. Ambassador Choi Han-sol arrived at the test sector feeling both excited and nervous. Earth had sent him as their second unarmed ambassador, following Lee Sun-woo's successful methods. The council had given them one small sector of space to try their peaceful approach to diplomacy. Han-sol remembered his last conversation with Sun Woo before leaving Earth. "Remember," she had said, "every species, no matter how different they look, wants the same basic things: safety, respect, and a chance to make their lives better." The test sector contained 5 different species who had been fighting for years. The council chose this sector because they thought it would be impossible to bring peace there. If Earth's methods worked here, they would work anywhere. Commander Kim Do-hyun met Han-sol at the sector's main station. "The local leaders expect you to fail," Do-hyun said. "They say Sun Woo's success was just luck." Han-sol smiled. Like Sun Woo, he had been a teacher before becoming an ambassador. "Then we will surprise them," he said. His first action shocked everyone. Instead of staying in the fancy ambassador's quarters, Han-sol moved into the regular living area where all 5 species lived. He ate in the common dining hall. He talked to ordinary people, not just their leaders. At first, people avoided him. They thought he was strange, walking around without weapons or guards. But then they noticed something. When Han-sol was around, the fighting stopped. Not because he had power or weapons, but because he listened to everyone with respect. One day, a young trader from one species discovered she could make better deals by working with a craftsman from another species. Han-sol helped them set up a small business together. Soon, others wanted to try similar partnerships. Do-hyun watched all this with growing interest. "The Earth Ambassador is building peace from the ground up," he wrote in his reports. Instead of forcing leaders to sign treaties, he's helping ordinary people work together. After 3 months, trade in the sector had doubled. Former enemies were starting businesses together. Children from different species were learning each other's languages. The council couldn't believe the change. "But how?" General Cax demanded during an inspection. "You have no weapons to keep order, no way to force them to cooperate." "That's exactly why it works," Han-sol explained. "When you come with weapons, people obey out of fear. When you come in peace, they cooperate because they want to." Park Jae-yun visited the sector next. She spent a week watching how Hansol worked. He makes it look so simple, she told Du Hyun. But what he's really doing is teaching them to solve their own problems. The success in the test sector couldn't be ignored. Other sectors started asking for Earth ambassadors. Species that had fought for centuries wanted to try this new way of making peace. Hansol wrote in his report to Earth, Sunwoo was right. The galaxy was ready for change. They just needed to see that peace isn't just the absence of weapons. It's the presence of understanding and cooperation. As Hansol prepared for another day of work, he looked out at the busy space station. Where armed guards once stood, he now saw trading partners discussing business. Where species once stayed separated, he saw them sharing meals and ideas. The experiment was working better than anyone had expected. Earth's peaceful approach wasn't just changing politics, it was changing how people lived their daily lives. General Kak stood before the council's high chamber, his scales dark red with anger. These Earth methods are destroying our traditions, he announced. For 10,000 years, the council has kept peace through strength. Now these humans want us to replace our weapons with words. The general's supporters nodded in agreement. Many older council members worried that Earth's peaceful approach was making the council look weak. They had called this special meeting to discuss the problem. But they hadn't expected Lee Minji to be ready for them. Minji was Earth's top data analyst, and she had spent months studying the results of the new diplomatic approach. As General Kax finished speaking, she stepped forward with her datapad. Honorable council members, Minji said calmly, I have analyzed every sector where Earth's diplomatic methods have been used. The numbers tell an interesting story. The chamber's giant display screen lit up with her findings. In sectors using Earth's peaceful approach, trade had increased by 200%. Violence had dropped by 80%. Species that hadn't spoken to each other in centuries were now working together. But what about respect? General Kax demanded. Other species used to fear the council. Now they treat us like teachers. Commander Kim Do-hyun, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Is being respected better than being feared? He asked. In the test sector, species follow the council's guidance because they want to, not because they have to. Park Jae-yun stood up next. She had prepared for this moment. I have visited both traditional sectors and those using Earth's methods, she said. In the traditional sectors, people hide their problems until they become wars. In the Earth method sectors, they ask for help before conflicts grow too large. The council chamber filled with heated discussion. Some older members supported General Kax, but many younger representatives were convinced by Minji's data. The numbers couldn't be ignored. Minji showed more information on the screen. In the past year, sectors using Earth's methods have spent less on weapons and more on schools, hospitals, and research centers. They are growing stronger through cooperation, not conflict. General Kax's scales shifted to a deep purple, a sign of uncertainty. The evidence was strong, but change was difficult. What will happen to those of us trained in the old ways? He asked quietly. Minji smiled. The data shows we need both approaches. Some situations need traditional strength. Others need peaceful solutions. The wisest path is to learn both ways. This idea caught everyone's attention. Instead of replacing the old system completely, they could combine the best of both methods. Even General Kax's scales began to show lighter colors. Do-hyun wrote in his report that evening, Today marks a turning point. The Council is beginning to understand that true strength comes in many forms. Earth's greatest gift to the galaxy might be showing that there is always another way. As the meeting ended, Minji saved her data and looked around the chamber. The Council was changing, not because anyone forced it to, but because the evidence showed a better path forward. Sometimes the strongest resistance to change came not from enemies, but from those who had always done things a certain way. The galaxy was learning that peace wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a different kind of strength. The change began quietly at first. A young diplomat from the Crystal Worlds arrived at a negotiation without weapons. The next week, representatives from the Cloud Cities did the same. Soon, more and more species were sending unarmed ambassadors to council meetings. They called it the Sunwoo Protocol, named after the Earth teacher, who first showed that peace was possible without weapons. Commander Kim Do-hyun watched with pride as the movement grew stronger each day. It's spreading faster than we expected, Park Jae-hyun told him during their morning meeting. Even species that have fought for centuries are asking to learn Earth's diplomatic methods. The council's grand meeting hall had changed. Where weapon racks once lined the walls, there were now comfortable seating areas for informal discussions. The heavy battle armor that ambassadors once wore had been replaced by their traditional cultural clothing. Lee Nin-ji's latest data report showed remarkable results. Sectors following the Sunwoo Protocol are experiencing their longest peaceful period in recorded history, she announced to the council. Trade agreements have increased by 500%. Cultural exchange programs are flourishing. Even General Cax had changed. His scales now showed calm blue colors more often than angry red ones. He had become an unexpected supporter of the new approach after seeing how well it worked. I was wrong about Earth's methods, he admitted during a council session. True strength isn't just about having the biggest weapons. It's about having the wisdom to know when not to use them. Do-hyun and Jae-hyun worked together to create a new training program for young diplomats. They combined traditional council knowledge with Earth's peaceful methods. The first class included students from 50 different species, all learning together without weapons or armor. One day, as Do-hyun watched the students practice diplomatic scenarios, he remembered something Sunwoo had told him years ago. The hardest part isn't making peace. It's helping others believe that peace is possible. The revolution wasn't just changing politics. It was changing how species saw each other. In spaceports and trading stations across the galaxy, different species began sharing meals together, just as Sunwoo had taught them. Children from different worlds played together without fear. Scientists and artists collaborated on projects that would have been impossible before. Some of the oldest council members were amazed by the change. In all our history, one ancient diplomat said, "We never imagined peace could look like this." Jae-hyun spent her days helping more sectors adopt the Sunwoo Protocol. The key, she explained to new diplomats, is to remember that everyone has something to teach and something to learn. When we approach others with respect and curiosity instead of weapons and threats, we discover how much we can achieve together. As the peaceful revolution spread, Do-hyun wrote in his final report of the year, Earth's greatest contribution to the galaxy wasn't technology or resources. It was the simple idea that true peace comes from understanding, not fear. Sometimes the most powerful revolution is the one that doesn't fire a single shot. The galaxy was learning a new kind of strength, the strength that comes from working together, from listening instead of threatening, from building bridges instead of walls. And it all began because one unarmed teacher dared to show them a different way. 20 years had passed since Lee Sunwoo first walked into the council chamber without weapons. Now she stood on the same spot again, her hair gray but her smile just as warm, watching as the old Galactic Council transformed into something new. The massive chamber was filled with representatives from every known species, but unlike 20 years ago, no one carried weapons. Instead, they carried datapads full of cultural exchange programs, trade agreements, and peace treaties. Commander Kim Do-hyun, now Chief of Diplomatic Relations, stood at the podium. Today, we celebrate not just the creation of the Galactic Peace Council, but the courage that brought us here, the courage to try something different, the courage to trust. In the front row sat Park Jae-hyun, who had worked so hard to make this day possible. Beside her was General Cax, his scales shimmering with peaceful gold colors. They had become close friends over the years, proof that the greatest changes often start with individual relationships. When Earth first sent an unarmed teacher as their ambassador, Do-hyun continued, many thought it was a mistake. Now we know it was the beginning of the most peaceful era our galaxy has ever known. Lead Ninji presented her final data report. In the 20 years since the Sunwoo Protocol began, war had become rare. Trade and cooperation had created more wealth than conflict ever had. Species that once fought over resources now work together to find new solutions. Sunwoo watched as Kim Yuri, Do Hyun's daughter, stepped forward to take her oath as a new ambassador. Like many young diplomats, Yuri had never carried a weapon. She had grown up in a galaxy that was learning to solve problems through understanding instead of force. I remember my first day teaching kindergarten. Sunwoo said when it was her turn to speak, "My students came from different backgrounds, spoke different languages, but they learned to be friends. They showed me that peace isn't something we create. It's something we let happen when we stop getting in its way." The new Galactic Peace Council would be different from the old one. Instead of forcing solutions, it would help species find their own paths to cooperation. Instead of threatening with weapons, it would offer help and understanding. As the ceremony ended, Sunwoo walked through the station's halls one last time. She passed the dining hall where she had first brought enemies together over shared meals. She saw the classrooms where young diplomats now learned both traditional wisdom and peaceful methods. Do Hyun found her looking out at the stars. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" he asked. Sunwoo smiled. "The galaxy was always capable of peace," she said. "It just needed someone to take the first step without weapons, to show that there was another way." That evening, as ships from 100 worlds carried the news of the Peace Council's creation to their home planets, Sunwoo packed her old datapad. Her work here was done. But across the galaxy, thousands of new ambassadors were ready to carry her message forward. The simple decision to send an unarmed teacher instead of an armed warrior had changed the galaxy forever. And as Sunwoo looked at the stars one last time, she knew that this was just the beginning of an even greater story.